these kind of influences come in, and the juristic class essentially loses power. This is true in most Muslim countries today. They're essentially negligible power for people who are Islamic jurists. There was an intellectual stagnation in terms of the development of Islamic jurisprudence, and a lot of the efforts that happened up to the classical age were lost. So, which essentially brings you to contemporary iterations of what Sharia is in politics. With the end of the caliphate, there are many different states that are formed. Pakistan, for example, was formed in 1947. That Sudan, other countries that claim to be Islamic republics and kind of have a legal system that is a mix of both, Western-style law and legislation, as well as Islamic law, right? In all of these countries, though, there is a central confusion around whether, what role Sharia should play and how Western you can be while still being, true to Islamic principles. Even within these ideas, there is a lot of room for debate and a lot of confusion, essentially, on what this means. Simply because if you look at original sources, if you look at Quranic sources, for example, there is no specific definition of an Islamic state. An Islamic state is never defined as such. And so all of that has followed from extrapolation, and there are varying definitions of that. Within other Islamic scholars, reformist scholars that are trying to kind of reform Sharia or reinvigorate the intellectual tradition of classical Islamic jurisprudence, again, there is a lot of difference of opinion on whether there can be an Islamic state. One personal, that I really respect is Professor Khalid Abu al-Fadl at UCLA Law School, who essentially says that it's very, very problematic when the state takes over enforcement of Sharia law simply because it's supposed to be the collective effort, the state cannot occupy a position that is at par with divine law. Because the state simply is not divine, and so it simply cannot involve itself in enforcing Sharia law. There are other scholars, obviously, that have varying opinions on this. So ultimately, what it boils down to is that these ideas, the ideas of what Sharia means today, are in flux. There are reformists within Islam who see the necessity of reinvigorating Sharia, of reinvigorating Islamic jurisprudence, of reinvigorating the intellectual tradition that was lost, and reinvigorating essentially the jurisprudential science that goes along with Islamic tradition. And then there are others, politically especially, who see the demand for Sharia law as essentially defined in post-colonial terms as a rejection of modernity. And obviously there are many groups who do this, and the most prominent examples, I guess, are from my native country in Pakistan, where Sharia law was just imposed in the Swat Valley, for those of you who are following that conflict in northern Pakistan, who say, well, this is Sharia. Sharia is the amputation of hands and the stoning of women. That is an aberration to the concept of Islamic law, to the concept of the science and the intellectual weight that goes behind a proper judicial system. It's essentially taking the most theatric and visually disturbing aspects of some punishments that are within Sharia debated. For example, I'll give you the example of the amputation of hands, which is by far the most popular thing that the TNSM and the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan like to do. Even within Islamic scholars, like Tariq Ramadan, there are arguments that that punishment simply does not apply anymore. It is a Quranic punishment, but it was suspended, among others, by the Khalif Umar way back when, because it was determined that the contextual factors that are required for the just application of that punishment simply don't exist anymore. But of course, that's not, they're not interested in looking at the jurisprudential aspects of Sharia. Another example is, the demand for Qazi courts. Like about 3 or 4 days ago, the leader of the Taliban in Swat essentially said, we've established Sharia, so the 600 lawyers that have been practicing law in the Swat Valley have to leave because, in Sharia, there are no lawyers. There's only qazis, and we're going to have qazis, and the lawyers need to leave. Again, that's a historical inaccuracy, because if he's saying that in the Quran, which is actually, he said in the Quran there are no lawyers. In the Quran there are also no qazis. Like I said, qazi courts were not established until several hundred years after the Prophet's death, when the administrative requirements of the Muslim community required a judicial system. So it's important then to see how these central confusions play out within the Muslim world and how they're very manipulatively used politically. I mean, if you ask a lay Muslim in Pakistan, do you believe in Sharia? Well, you're Muslim. You should support Sharia. They're at a loss because they're thinking, okay, well, yeah, of course I believe in Sharia. I'm a Muslim. And then, these kind of ideas are sold to them as, well, if you believe in Sharia, you have to believe in this. Well, they've come up with the this because it supports a political agenda. These kind of theatrical demonstrations are very effective kind of theater as essentially showing the kind of control that they have over the region and to instill fear among the population. They're very successful in doing that. And the ultimate tragedy is that they are using these aspects to define Sharia, which is a complete and flagrant lie. I mean, Sharia stands for a very rich classical tradition of Islamic law that was developed over centuries, that has incredible diversity, that shows the diversity of the Muslim world. And to kind of conflate that to achieve political objectives is really, it's one of the biggest challenges that faces Islam and Muslims today.
Support for Voices and Visions comes from the Social Science Research Council, the SSRC, leading innovation in the social sciences and educating the next generation of social science researchers.